To access the photo mode, it's simple enough. Pause the game and go down to photo mode. So first things first, hit X so you can get a grid on screen, and this grid will be known as the rule of thirds. It's not a definite rule, you're allowed to break it, but basically this will help line up and compose your shot. So this first tab here is your lens tab, and it starts you off with a roll, and roll is simple, it just rotates the image. And if you wanted to, you can go all the way onto the opposite ends and do, like, let's say if we go to 90 degrees, you can do a portrait image if you wanted to. You can keep going and get a very unique upside down shot if you wanted to. Not very many games will do this, where it'll take the roll and just completely flip the image upside down. So you can get some unique shots out just from the roll alone. So I'm not really going to mess with the roll. So I'm just going to go back to the middle. So next is your field of view slider. And if we zoom all the way out, this will be your wide angle. And if you zoom all the way in, this is your telephoto. Now the one thing I'm noticing is this is introducing your telephoto compression and your wide angle distortion. Telephoto compression is when your foreground, which here is Celine, and your background, which is the ship, are compressed. They look like they're right next to each other. Now if we go towards the wide angle, line up Celine's head into that corner of the lines, this here is your wide angle distortion, where your foreground and your background, they're being distorted. They're being spread apart. I would say the best way to implement wide angle distortion or telephoto compression is wide angle distortion. Use that with a scene. So like, for example, if I move the camera, like let's say over here, right? You're capturing a scene. You're capturing all the environment. You're capturing the ship and so on. And with wide angle, you can actually get up close to your subject and still capture the scene. Whereas telephoto, you have to move back. So if I move back here, say we bring this down, field of view, let's go all the way to the left. Your scene gets reduced, but this is way more flattering when it comes to portraits especially. You can also use this for something in the distance. Like for example, if Celine was standing there and there's like a big boss kind of like further away on the map, then you can use the telephoto compression to pull in the background to make it look like that boss is right next to Celine. So like in this case, the ship, it looks like it's right next to her. And if you go towards the wide angle, it looks like it's a little bit further away. So moving on to the next slider, you have your depth of field intensity and your depth of field distance. So the intensity, let's go ahead and max this out. Once you increase this slider, this here is your blur or your bokeh. If you're wondering what affects the blur in a real camera, that will be your aperture. Depending on the aperture on the lens, you'll get either more or less blur. So the easiest way to remember is the smaller the number, the more blur you're gonna get. So if we max out the depth of field intensity, this will be something like f1.8, f1.4, something like that, where you get a lot of bokeh. So we're gonna go ahead and keep that maxed out. Let's move the distance slider. So if we move it back, we want Celine in focus, which that looks pretty good right there. And if you wanted to, you can actually bring down the intensity at this point. What I actually want to do is I want to zoom in even further. Let's move this camera a little bit. Let's do something like that. Oops. So one thing to note, this is what I'm noticing right now, is that the more you zoom in, the harder it is to move the camera around. So just keep that in mind when you're adjusting the camera. So next tab, you have your lighting. So global light intensity, this is actually the light that's coming from like the top of the map. So let's actually move away from this area. And let's go ahead and increase the telephoto. We'll just aim it up a little bit. Okay. So now with the global light intensity, this is going to adjust the lighting that's coming from the top of the map. So if we bring this down, you'll notice that the light for the map is decreasing. Now, if we move back to the ship, where this light is, it's not going to affect it. So just keep that in mind, that this won't adjust the lighting intensity of specific lights placed in the map. It's just going to affect the lights above the map. So let's go back to that one area back here. So we know what the lighting intensity does. Just increases or decreases the brightness of the global light. The angle adjusts the position of that light. So if we change the degrees of it, this is basically just rotating the light up at the top based on which degree you're putting it at. So if you really want to fine tune the shadows, especially in whatever shot you're going for, like this right here, then I would highly suggest adjusting the global light angle. So next you have you have spotlights, and this is specifically for Selene. So by default, the number of spotlights is always going to show 1, but you can actually turn it off if you wanted to. So if you really wanted to get a dark, moody look, you can go ahead and do that. But you can actually add up to 3. So there's 3 spotlights around Selene in what looks like a triangle formation, like kind of above her head. So really, this just comes down to personal preference. How lit up do you want Selene? So let's do 3, and so this will control the spotlight intensity and rotation. Let's say if we start rotating them, it'll change the shadows, and you can kind of see on her helmet the location of these spotlights. You're not going to see these in the game. They're kind of invisible spotlights, but the reflection of them, you can kind of see it in her helmet. And once you have your rotation set, then you can change the intensity of the spotlight. I feel like it's pretty bright, a little too much, but the option is there if you need it. So if she's already in a kind of bright area and you feel like, I think she needs a little bit more brightness, turn on the spotlights, increase the intensity, and then change the rotation so you get the shadows the way you want them looking. What I'm going to do, I'm actually going to do 1 spotlight, bring down the intensity because I don't want it to be too harsh, and we'll just do something like that. I like that moody shadow. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So your next tab is your image tab, and here you can have a color filter, which if we go through these are very subtle. These aren't anything crazy, and for this game I like these. These are very tasteful. So by default, if you take a look at the none and the warm, they're pretty similar. If you're taking a picture of someone, I would say lean more on the warmer side. That way their skin looks a little bit more flattering. If you put it on cool, they look a bit pale and a little sickly. And if you're going for that look, more power to you. But just generally speaking, you're taking a picture of someone, go for something a little bit warmer. These filters overall, I'm a fan of these. They're very subtle and they fit the game. I think I'm gonna keep it on none for now. So your brightness is pretty straightforward. Do you want to brighten the image? Do you want to darken the image? That's really up to you. That's personal preference. Saturation, this will be basically your color. Like how much of it do you want it to pop? So if we desaturate the image, it'll just suck all of the color out of it. Go the opposite direction, you'll see more color. It's a little bit more vibrant. So depending on the mood that you're going for, or just like the image in general, your saturation would be key when it comes to color. Contrast, this will be basically your ratio between your highlights and your shadows. So if you increase the contrast, it'll basically increase that separation between your highlights and your shadows. If you go the opposite direction, you'll get more of a faded look. I think for something like this, for this kind of image, because there's already enough contrast on her face due to the lighting and the shadows, I feel like increasing the contrast in here would help the image dramatically. So let's do maybe like that. If I go a little bit too much, the shadows are starting to take over. But I think about 70% compared to the default, I think that looks pretty good. Here you have your effects tab, and it starts you off with your chromatic aberration, which for most games I'm not a fan of, but I think for this, it would fit. So if you increase the chromatic aberration, it'll give you this distorted look, which on a real lens, this is more of like a lens defect, or an artistic merit of the lens. I mean, that's really up to taste. But like I said, most games I'm not a fan of chromatic aberration, but I think for this game, this fits perfectly well. Next, you have your bloom, which this is basically for spotlights. So actually, let's go back to that ship. So if we increase the bloom, that spotlight will basically increase. And of course, you can go all the way to 0% and just kind of darken it up. So if you come across a spotlight of some sort that's in the map and you think, okay, this is a little too bright, or it's not bright enough, use the bloom to adjust the brightness of it. Now if we go back to that one area, I don't keep running back and forth, bear with me. Something like this orb. The bloom affects that too. And then look at these flowers here. So if you want that glowing look from different light sources, then adjust your bloom. So after your bloom, you have effects, and I would say this is probably one of the best things about the photo mode in Returnal. So if you go into these effects, they basically simulate more of like a retro 80s look to it. You got your pixelated one, you got a retro. Background's not really helping much here, but you get the idea. Like this, that's really cool. How many games do this? Like, the effects in this game are fantastic. Like, I like this glitch, VHS one. Like, if you really want a retro effect in a game's photo mode, Returnal's the way to go. So next up, you have your vignette. So a vignette essentially darkens up the edges of the screen. So if we increase this slider, you'll notice an oval just kind of moving into the center while it's darkening up. I feel like this image right here is perfect for a vignette, because what you want is to focus your eyes kind of towards the middle, which is the best way to use a vignette, is to kind of use it to focus someone's eyes towards the subject or the center. So if we do, like, let's say 50%, this immediately looks better than an image without a vignette. But just be careful, because if you go too hard with the vignette, it may look a little too synthesized and maybe not as tasteful, but really that's up to you. But I've always felt that a vignette is a make or break thing for an image. I've seen some images before where it's just a little too much, so just play around with it and find something that you like. In this case, I like 50%. I feel like this is a good balance. Next, you have your global fog density, which, I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory. Increase this and you get more fog in the image. Easy. Next. Now your film grain type, you have 35mm, 16mm, and 8mm. And what this is trying to do is replicate the film grain on the type of film let's say a movie was shot on. Most movies that have ever been made have been shot on 35mm film. Even modern movies today still use 35mm film, which is why if you go to the theater, sometimes you'll see some graininess on there because it's shot on film. Now, if you go into 16mm and 8mm, these aren't really used as much anymore. Reason why this is grainier is because the actual size of the film from corner to corner is 8mm, 16mm, and 35mm. So if you go for an 8mm film, like let's say like just a little cutout of film that's 8mm, and you try to blow it up into a 1080p screen or 4K screen, this is what you're gonna see. The easiest comparison I can make is, let's say you're watching something at 480p and you blow it up to a 4K display. What are you gonna notice? It's pixelated, it's grainy, and so on. The same thing is happening here. So 8mm film, it's a small form factor, small little piece of film that's being blown up onto a larger viewing area. So I'll leave a couple links down below for movies shot in 8mm and 16mm. Just about everything is shot in 35mm, including Alien, which is what this game is heavily influenced by. So if you wanted to replicate more of an Alien feel, then film grain type 35mm is the way to go. So next tab is your gradient tab. And here, if we turn on the gradient, so let's turn this intensity all the way up. The easiest way to describe this is two filters kind of on top and bottom, and you get to choose what the filters are. So if I do gradient color 1, I can change, you know, how this spotlight is. If I go gradient color 2, I can go for more of like a cooler look. And of course, use the intensity to kind of balance it out. It doesn't have to be, you know, full blown 100%. But that's really cool that you can actually do split toning in a photo mode. And what's even cooler is that you can rotate it. So you can basically change where you want the color tone to be. So just right down the middle, for example. You want one side red, one side blue. Bring down the intensity, and now you have more of a, like let's say if we just do that, now you have this cool effect, which kind of replicates Celine's eyes. Next, you have your decoration, and this is just like some small little flourishes to kind of spice up the image just a little bit more. So you can choose a frame of some sort, which again, they have some pretty cool frames in this that match the aesthetic of the game. I personally like the cinematic one. This one, it just makes me feel like I'm watching a movie. I like this a lot. Yeah, these are very tasteful. Normally when it comes to frames in other games, I'm not a huge fan. Some of them are cool, but this one, all of these fit the game so well and they all look pretty tasteful. But I'm gonna stick with the cinematic frame. Then you have a logo, which you can choose a Returnal logo, Astra, Housemarque logo, and that's it. I'm gonna go with the Returnal logo, and then you can actually adjust where you want this, which I like that. Compared to other games usually have like a set spot where you can put a logo. Here I like that you can change like the exact position. I can change the size of it. Let's say I want this down here. Let's do something like this. Like that. I think that looks pretty good. Whoops, moving the camera. That doesn't look good. That looks good. There we go. So let's say we hide this, hide that, and then you hide me, and you hide the UI. Oh yeah, that looks pretty good. Now the photo mode in Returnal isn't super deep like other Sony first party games, but what's here is enough to where you can learn something that's a little bit more technical, like your field of view, having telephoto and wide angle, and the ability to adjust spotlights. But I would say the best thing about the photo mode is the effects. Usually I'm not a big effects person, but this is what sells this photo mode. The fact that you have these cool retro style effects, plus, damn, it looks badass. Plus you have your film grading type, which you can replicate, you know, actual film with. That's pretty amazing. I would say this photo mode is definitely for someone who loves retro, who loves aliens, the 80s. If you're looking for a photo mode, this is it. What do you think about Returnal's photo mode? Let me know down below. I think that's going to be it for me today, and I'll see you guys next time.